Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. Sorry, I have Freddie next to me. You can barely see him though. This is Freddie. This is best of British history blend. So it has black and green tea. It is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Freddie. with Harney and Sons. So I actually got another tea, but I'll show that to you another time. But I got to go back to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so I thought that would be good to tie it in, you know? Okay, this is going to be one of those videos where I'm a little bit distracted by my little boy. Because he decided to take this time to become a part of things, but... Say hi, Freddie. He's like, no. Anyway, this is the June... No, this is the May. I don't know what month I'm in. This is the May wrap-up, and he knocked some of the books to the floor, so now I'm going to have to get them. Excuse me. All right. You know, these cats are like, if you don't pay attention to them, they'll be like, anything you're paying attention to, they will sit on and they will knock over, and I love them. But anyway, so let's talk about May. It was a good reading month for me. I read 10 books. I completed 10 books, I should say, and read from other books as well. I read 4 mysteries, so I have about 6 books to talk to you about. And yes, 6 books. Yeah, it's so hard when he's down here and you can't really see him because then I'm talking to like down below. It's so weird. But anyway, and my regret in the month was that I didn't read as much of the Springathon books that I planned to read, which was nature writing. And I do have so many nature writing books that I want to read. But again, after losing my cat Zenobia to a short but sad illness, my brain had to go in a different direction. And first I read a lot of mysteries because that was just a great distraction for me. And I also finished the one nature writing book that I had, and I got back to the 1900s, 1950 books eventually because I had started that. So there are 2 read-alongs. But yeah, the detour was necessary for me, but regrettable in a lot of ways. What are you going to do? But I will talk about the one that I did finish, and it was, I think, a group read as well. And this is Long Lit Wounds, The Way Through the Woods. This is, it says on mushrooms and mourning. So this is a woman who, I think she and her husband had been talking about taking a class about, you know, learning about mushrooms and stuff, foraging or whatever. You know, sometimes you have plans that you make that you might end up doing, but you might not. And her husband died suddenly. And yes, completely unexpected. She went through every kind of part of grief you can go through. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. I've never lost a spouse. I've dealt with grief in many ways, but not like that. When you are, you know, you just don't expect that kind of thing to happen. So one of the things she decides to do when she's pulling herself out of the, you know, initial stages of grief is to take the class and to learn about mushrooms and to go out foraging in the forest with fellow mushroom enthusiasts. And so she learns a lot and shares what she learns with us, the reading audience. And I really like this. It's a pretty cover. Very green. It's one of my favorite colors. Even though it's a little bit dark, that's okay, because morning can be dark as well. So it's mostly in Norway, so it's a lot of learning about the Norwegian views of different kinds of mushrooms and identifying them and being safe and everything. But she does travel to other places like Central Park in New York and other parts of New York and elsewhere, which I like to, because, you know, and I forgot, every time I go to Central Park, I forget to look around to see if I see any mushrooms, because I'm just not thinking that. I see squirrels. But anyway, I am a great squirrel spotter, and I see robins and ducks. I mean, come on. I haven't seen owls yet. Still waiting for the owls, but that is a side point. So it's interspersed. We learn a lot about mushrooms. There's recipes, so you learn not just about, okay, how to identify which ones are poisonous. There is a whole big section about poisonous and toxic mushrooms and stuff, and the levels of them, because some of them aren't completely, but it's just how much you eat of them, etc. I wouldn't take a chance. But I guess if I learned as much as she had, I would. Maybe. And just how different countries classify things differently. It's fascinating. And also the many different tastes. Some mushrooms can be used in desserts. Who knew? Some can be used in other types of dishes that I never even thought of. And she's quite adventurous in that way. Not like bizarrely adventurous. But so those stories are written, and then you get different parts about her husband and losing her husband and how she's dealing with that. And it almost seems like, asymmetrical, or whatever you want to call it. But I think that works, because have you ever dealt with grief before? Sometimes you can be going through a day where you're wrapped up in something, and then a memory pops in, a reminder pops in about that person that you lost. So I think that really kept the mood going. And I do recommend this very much. I very much enjoyed this book. If you're not at all interested in mushrooms, I don't know if this book is for you, but maybe give it a try if the thought of reading about foraging is at all something you might want to learn about. I wish I could do stuff like that, and I don't know if I'm going to get there, because who knows. So that makes me regret, again, not reading as much nature writing, but it gives me, did I say this before? It gives me something to look forward to. But then let's get back to the 1900 to 1950 readings, because I was a little more successful with that, besides just the Agatha Christie, which I don't need to talk about now. The first book I finished was an accomplishment in a couple of ways, because this was a Virago modern classic, also that beautiful green. This is Winifred Holtby, The Crowded Street. And I have sort of collected, just kind of by accident, a number of these volumes, this green Virago classic from a while back, and I really liked the look of the collection, but I don't usually just get things for the aesthetic. That's just a side thing, like if I'm gonna buy 2 books, the same book, I have to choose from 2 different books. I would probably choose what was the better value of them, but I might spend a little more if it did look nicer, if it was nicer to hold, if it was more pleasant, whatever. But I don't get too far. But anyway, these are not expensive, at least when I found them. The most I've ever paid for one of these is $3, so that's not bad. And often I find them for $1, so that's pretty good. But I also felt bad because aside from one book that I read, there's like 2 stories in it, I read one of them. Aside from that, I have not finished any of the Viragos that I have, and I thought that was rather ridiculous. So I thought this is a time to include this. This worked with the prompt about World War I or II, like if it has a bearing on the story. It doesn't have to be just about that, but this takes place at some point during World War I, which did change a lot about this world, so it does affect the story itself. But it is a slightly different story. I mean, not radically different nowadays, but maybe back then, about a girl who doesn't find herself getting married. Her mother is a little bit of a Mrs. Bennet, but her situation is not really Pride and Prejudice-y, but she kind of reminds me a bit of Mary Bennet and Kitty Bennet, I think, like if you combine them. And her sister kind of reminds me of like Lydia Bennet if like a Bronte wrote her. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what it felt like for me. But her mother tries to have a prominent place in the community and wants to have something to be proud of, and her daughters don't seem to be finding husbands and giving her any kind of status and whatever. That's not like everything in the book, but it is kind of a big deal because Muriel, the main character in this book, kind of feels like she's not a successful daughter or whatever, but she also kind of wants an education beyond what is usually expected for women in that time. But that clashes with her time. And it goes into her when she was younger, how she really doesn't always get things, takes things literally. Okay, Freddie decided to take off. He doesn't want to be part of this video. So, fine. Anyway, I gotta stop talking to my cat. So I thought I'd read you a couple of lines to kind of see what I mean. There's a friend of hers named Claire that she meets at school that helps her come out of her shell a little bit, and affects her life in a lot of different ways, but her friend Claire says, "I haven't got a partner. Will you walk with me?" Muriel, blushing and palpitating, answered, "If you like." Always, when she was profoundly moved, she became a little stiffer and more prim, like a Victorian teapot or a bit of sprigged muslin. I don't know, I thought that was kind of funny. And then there's this part where it says, "The world was all right. It was she who was wrong, caring for all the wrong things." Which is a problem. And then later on in the book, when it says, "What on earth shall I do when I get home? Read? All books are the same, all about beautiful girls who get married or married women who fall in love with their husbands. In books, things always happen to people. Why doesn't somebody write a book about someone to whom nothing ever happens, like me?" And I guess that's this book, right? But things do happen. I mean, there is like a bit of a moment where they're staying in an area that gets a little bit of affected by wartime activity, and like in the middle of the night they have to run out of the building, and it's a bit of an adventure, I guess. So I mean, something happens, but like she has at least one love interest that sort of sticks in her mind for so many years. But she kind of wants just to have a life that she wants, but she also wants to please her family. And her sister goes about things a completely different way, to varying results. And I don't want to tell you everything because it's, spoilers, but it really is about not just her, but other women that she is influenced by, both for good and bad, to do things maybe in a different way than was expected in those times. So I like that. And I also read, this was the book that won the BookTube spin, which meant I had to read it by the end of June, but, well, mission accomplished anyway. But this was written in the first part of the 20th century. So this is Stella Gibbons' Cold Comfort Farm. And I'd seen the film before, and I'd seen it multiple times because I just got such a kick out of it. And so I compared it a little bit, and it's both very funny in a weird kind of way. Flora Post is not very well off, but she has had a certain upbringing, and her parents die, and she is not completely put out about that, but she needs to figure out what she's going to do with her life. She likes things tidy, so she decides to get in touch with different relatives and see where she can learn about life and do, and maybe help out in some way or another. So she finds her aunts and cousins in this place called Cold Comfort Farm in, I think, Sussex, England, where they're just living a completely miserable existence on this farm, and everybody's life just is in incredible need of tidiness. And she's a bit like Emma from Jane Austen. She just likes to fix things, So that's basically what she does the whole book. And sometimes you think, well, is she right about this? Is she really helping? But things turn out usually to be for people's benefit, or at least she does overhaul the entire place. And I thought it was good. I thought it compared well with its adaptation in that it wasn't too far off. There were some changes. There's always changes that need to be done just for interpretation reasons or whatever. But it was faithful enough that you got the main story. And it has one of the most legendary lines in any book ever. I saw something nasty in the woodshed. And if you don't know what that means, you have to really either read the book or see the movie, because it is so ridiculous. So it has almost like a gothic novel feeling. That's not probably what I'm thinking of. But, in terms of how, I'm mentioning Jane Austen again. She's always my, reference. But when, why am I holding this teapot? Teacup. I can't speak English. When Jane Austen wrote Northanger Abbey, it was sort of to mock a certain type of book. So this was sort of mocking like the pastoral dramatic novels of Stella Gibbons' time. And sorry, traffic once again. And she does a good job of it. She sends up the entire, type of book, genre. That's the word. And I thought it was good that the movie took out the whole, this was, written in the 30s, but it takes place in the near future, and there are certain, like, weird modern technologies that don't exist yet, like a more of a public transportation being done with airplanes going to more localized areas for the general public, and yet horses and stuff on farms still, horse and buggies and stuff, or carriages, whatever you want to call it. And there's reference to a war that happens in the 40s, but it's definitely not World War II. There's like a sort of a video phone, like Skyping or Zooming or FaceTiming or whatever you want to call it, but in a slightly different manner. So it's almost like sci-fi. And that, I don't really know why Stella Gibbons needed to put that in there. I kind of think that the movie did well to take that out. I don't know if you may think differently. But I'm trying to talk and sip at the same time. That's always brilliant. But I actually had fun with this book. Like, I really just sat and read it and was just like laughing at certain lines. I don't know if I can read these lines or if they're just things that I liked myself. No, I was just tagging the part where they mentioned the Anglo-Nicaraguan War. What? Yeah, it was mostly about these modern things that I did. There were certain lines that I thought were a little questionable, but for the most part, a very just enjoyable, quick, fun read. So was Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day, which takes place in the space of a day. Miss Pettigrew is this spinster who has always been a governess, but not a successful one, is at the end of her career line, doesn't know what's going to happen. She goes to this employment agency and gets mistakenly sent to a place where this woman lives who has a very different life than hers, but she helps her out with something to do with her relationships and immediately gets taken in for the entire day on just one big adventure and makeovers and nightclubs and parties and stuff that, and a lot of drinking, that Miss Pettigrew had never experienced. So she taps into talents that she never knew existed, and she decides just to go with it, Yeah, tomorrow she may be back out in the street and not knowing what's going to happen in her life, but today she's going to just make the most of it. As soon as she realizes that she's going to do that, it becomes interesting. It's not like she's running like a whole long con. It's just she doesn't even get a chance to explain herself and the mistake. So, and it's just it is a it's called like a modern, is it called a modern day Cinderella story? Someone said that or Cinderella fantasy. It's not exactly like that, but there is that feeling of suddenly being taken out of this sad existence and put in a whole different world and sort of meeting a prince in its own way. And I thought we could do this, I had seen the film also previously. This is like a record here. And by the way, 2 books with a Winifred author. It must have been a common name back then. I don't know. And I remember liking the movie. It's been ages. It had the same actor who played Captain Wentworth in the Persuasion of 95, so that was kind of fun. He's been in a lot of things, but that's the one I remembered him the most from. And I think it was Amy Adams and a number of other people that you would recognize. A lot of Oscar winners. And I remember just thinking, this is fun. This is fun. And I heard that there was a book about it, and I said I'm going to read it one day, and I found this book at Book Off, so of course I did. And yes, it read very quickly, and it was entertaining. But it is hard to recommend in some ways because of the certain lines that happens quite often in a lot of the books of that time period, but still ends up shocking sometimes because things are kind of racist or whateverist. And you go, whoa, I could never read that out loud, like how could you say that? And, it's hard enough when you read that and you're like, okay, this is terrible how they felt about this group of people. And you want to empathize, but it's not as relatable until it kind of goes in your direction. I mean, I've read things where people say things against Americans, but they were talking about other groups that, that my family came from in a disparaging way that I was like, wow, so that's what it's like, I mean, not that I've never encountered that before, but it is a little difficult, and I don't really believe in censoring books, but I also recall that Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None had a different title and they changed it, so I'm like, maybe they could, I don't know about removing it or at least doing some kind of footnote or something to acknowledge that this is not cool. I don't know. But then again, if that didn't exist, we wouldn't understand what people were like back then. I guess. Anyway, so that kind of took me from saying, oh, this is a great book, almost 5 stars, but I'll say 4.5, whatever, just putting it to 4. Because in terms of readability and enjoyability, it was great. I meant to read it in June, but I wanted to read it so badly that I read it at the end of May. But in that, it just puts a little damper. What are you going to do? Language always puts a damper on things, and that's why Tom Cox's books, much as I love them, yes, sometimes there is a bit more language in it that I would like, but it's more acceptable in these times. So, okay. But yeah, so I've read a number of books. I've shown a couple of his books on this channel already. I got into his books by reading ones mainly about his cats, which makes sense for me. Thankfully, this wasn't a lot about that because I wasn't really up to reading about that in the month of May. But this is, like his other books, were a lot of memoir, a lot of different things. I kind of thought it was going to be a little bit more nature writing because it usually has some of it. So I thought that would work for Springathon. It didn't really, but not that it had none, but not as much. But he talks about walking a lot and different things he observes, and history and folklore and people he meets in pubs and people he knows. Was it someone named 70s Pat or something? Which I don't know. Every time I see that name, I think that's what it's called, 70s Pat. Every time I see that, I don't know why, there is someone I knew and know who I picture whenever I see that name, even though it's not the same person, obviously. And yeah, life with, things about his family, things also about other animals that he encounters, and I think his sense of humor is pretty great. And this book came out of him losing a notebook and never getting it back, and which devastates a writer. I would devastate anybody, but a writer, that's kind of important for him. So he takes things from other notebooks and compiles this book, and I thought that was great. It's not that long compared to his other books. It's quite short. I think this is 120 something pages. So if you just want a quick read, this is it for you. And it made me really want to get back to my notebooks. That and Amy, the Dusty Bookshelf, I think it's called. Amy's Dusty Bookshelf. I know she changed the name recently, but I love her channel. She did a couple of videos about notebooks recently. One was about new ones that she picked up, and one was about ones she had in the past and currently using, that sort of thing. It was inspiring, and I want to do a video like that myself one day again. I did one about journals a couple of years ago when I needed help picking out a journal. And I've talked about book journaling, and I have stuff to say about that as well, because my current method is not as successful as I would have liked it to be. So that really just puts me in the mood. Both those videos and this book. So yeah, give it a try. And last but not least, I finished Catherine Parr, The Sixth Wife, about Henry VIII's last wife. Nothing new in this book really, but it does get into a little more about her life before she met Henry VIII. I knew a little bit about it, but not as much. A little bit of speculation about her first husband. You have to fill in some gaps. But it doesn't go as far as she did say in the book about Anne of Cleves. This is a little, I think, a little closer. She puts Henry VIII in a slightly better light than I usually see him in, but I also imagine if you were married to him, and in their case, their marriage was one of the more successful ones, not in terms of offspring, but, well, she did help get the family together and put them in the succession. But just in terms of successful, that he didn't have her killed, and that he seemed to have died with her in, favor. Not bad. So I guess I would think well of someone like that if I were in her shoes, maybe. She seemed to be more ambitious than I remembered reading about her previously. Not, incredibly. Not most of the books, she wasn't like that, but then once she got married to Henry, it, became a little bit of a thing. So I didn't expect that, but I also sort of think, why not? I saw this great video by Dr. Kat, Reading the Past, excellent channel, where she analyzes a portrait of Catherine Parr and gets into what the messages behind it would have been. And yeah, maybe she did have a little bit of thoughts about herself that, I can't possibly understand. But yes, it was a thoroughly enjoyable historical fiction book. Great Tudor times. And yeah, I'm not sad that series is over, because how much can you possibly read about the wives of Henry VIII? But I'm pretty happy with the last book. So that was a pretty good not a pretty good month for me, but you know, in terms of what happened in the month, but it was a pretty good reading month. So that, if it's just about reading, May was a good month. I also hit 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully, hopefully I will stay above 1,000. There's been a couple of things happening, but let's not talk about that today. Until next time, if you like these subjects, if you like hearing about these kind of books, then feel free to subscribe, please. And yeah, and welcome if you've not been here before. I should have said that earlier. So anyway, this is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day, month, year.